Do you mutter under your breath or pretend you're explaining it to someone else? Why do you think you do that? Do you think it helps you understand and retain the information? Hopefully by the end of this talk you'll think that it's useful and that languaging is an important part of the learning process. And this is the case whether you're learning history, mathematics, science, or French. Languaging is a cognitively demanding form of verbalization and can be defined as the process of making meaning and shaping knowledge and experience through language. And this is Meryl Swain, who many of you might associate with the construct of output, is now talking about languaging, and output has been left a little behind. In this paper, we explore the languaging effect, the outcomes in terms of learning about the grammatical concept of French in voice. Voice is active, passive, and in French middle, as we will see. So the outcomes associated with high languagers, those who language a lot, and low languagers in a small sample of university students. One unique feature of this study is that it permits us to scrutinize how participating students who learned relatively more or less about the target grammatical concept approached the task. We interviewed the learners to get information on their backgrounds with respect to learning French and their reactions to the intervention that we designed for them. The transcribed languaging and stimulated recall protocols, and we'll talk about the design in a minute, provide a window into the minds of more and less successful learners and allow us to describe their learning in progress. Here are the research questions. Does languaging of the grammatical concept of voice lead intermediate university students to a deeper understanding of that concept? And there are two related questions. Is there a relationship between the quality of languaging and performance as measured by immediate and delayed post-tests? And is there a relationship between the quantity of languaging and performance as measured by immediate and delayed post-tests? Now we turn to the participants. We recruited 9 students at a major university in southern Ontario from a course designed for intermediate learners of French. The course is designed to emphasize the development of communicative performance. I visited some of those classes and consulted with instructors of the multi-section course, and I noted that there was regular instruction in grammar, and they confirmed this. We then determined the highest and lowest languagers in the sample, and we conveniently named them. We assigned pseudonyms. H is for high, L is for low, as you can see there. And we focus in this paper on 4 participants, Heidi and Holly, the 2 highest, and Lisa and Lucy, the 2 lowest languagers. Here you have the pseudonyms of the participants along with their program and language background information. The population of the university is highly diverse, and students who take the intermediate French course come from a variety of program backgrounds in elementary and secondary school. The focus participants for what I'm reporting on today were English dominant. 3 of them, as you can see, spoke a home language along with English. Now I'm going to give you an overview of the study design, and you have it also in Table 1 of your handout. Because of a lack of time, I'll be discussing only the shaded cells on your handout, and on the screen, the relevant cells will be bolded as I talk about them, if I coordinate this properly. As you can see in Table 1, data collection was distributed over 2 sessions, the first having several stages and lasting about 90 minutes, including a short break. The second, the delayed post-test session, consisted of 1 stage and lasted 20 minutes on average. To acquaint the participants with the procedure to be used, we carried out a warm-up activity similar to what they would be asked to do later on. That's in column 1 of your handout, and it should be bolded on the screen. The pre-test stage followed. Students were given a text, and you have that text that you can inspect later on the next page of your handout. It's the Sophie Mercier text. Each participant read through the text, taking as much time as she needed. 13 verbs in the text were bolded, and each student talked through the text, saying as much as she could about the form and meaning of each bolded verb. In all cases, participants tended to focus on the form of the verb, mentioning the person ending or tense of the bolded item. So, for example, if it was je prépare, if that's what was bolded in the text, people would say, oh, it's je, it's an ER verb, it's present tense, and so on. Nobody talked about voice. Nobody talked about the fact that that was an active voice sentence. During the languaging stage, that's in column 3 of your table, we presented an explanatory text. You also have this for later perusal in your handout, and if anyone didn't get a handout, just write to me and I'll send you one. So we presented an explanatory text on the grammatical concept of voice, and we presented this text sentence by sentence on large cards. Or if you like, chunk by chunk. And here are the instructions that the participants had to read aloud before beginning. The following activity is designed to teach you something about the concept of voice in French. There is research to suggest that explaining grammatical concepts, rather than focusing on rules of thumb, leads to a deeper understanding of the grammar of the second language. This process is more effective when learners get a chance to think aloud about the concept. So the attached sheets present information about the concept of voice in chunks, allowing you time to think about each piece of information and explain it out loud. So that's what they read, and then they started to get the text chunk by chunk, and you'll see the way it's chunked when you inspect it later. There were 36 explanatory cards, including 2 diagrams. Whenever we felt the participant needed prompting, we used what's called content-free prompts. So if the participant was relatively silent, we would say things like, can you explain what you're thinking? Could you be a little more specific? Could you elaborate on what you've just said? That's the kind of thing we prompted them with. The participants were given a break after the languaging stage. The final stage of session 1 was an immediate post-test stage where we provided the participants with the same text, the Sophie Mercier Part 1 text, with the bolded verbs, and asked again that they identify the voice of each sentence, explaining the forms used to express the active, passive, or middle voice. And in a little while, you're going to see the results of that. I'm still in the design. Following the immediate post-test stage, we interviewed each participant, asking about their background with respect to home language, type of program in which they'd studied French in the past, and their reactions to the multi-stage activities they had just completed. 1 week later, we administered delayed post-test A. It consisted of another part of the text that followed Sophie Mercier Part 1. There was another part of that story. And in this case, we left blanks. We provided 11 verbs in their infinitive form. You have that test also in your package. And the students had to fill in 11 blanks using the appropriate verb form. Now, after they had done that, we did a stimulated recall. So we said, okay, take us through your text now, and for every verb form that you filled in, please tell us what you were thinking as you filled in each blank. Okay? So, now, our methods of analysis. To address our research questions about the quantity and quality of languaging, we analyzed each participant's in-between cards talk. So they were reading a card from the explanatory text, and then they told us everything they could about that card, their understanding of that card. We recorded everything and we transcribed what they had said between each card. So we analyzed their talk in between cards, that is the language they produced when they were not reading the text that was on the cards. And we counted the number of languaging units. Then we grouped them into the following 5, whoops, sorry about that, categories. So one of the categories was paraphrase, where the participant repeated a conceptual unit expressed in the card. There were 36 cards, as you remember, and each one was considered, not each one, but almost each one was a conceptual unit. We divided, for our own means of analysis, we divided the cards into conceptual units. Paraphrase was one type of conceptual unit, and paraphrase was one way of addressing a conceptual unit, so where the participant would just repeat a conceptual unit that was expressed in the card, maybe not using the same words, but repeat the idea. Inferencing occurred when the participant talked about the content of a card before she read it, or repeated a piece of information that she read one or several cards before the card that she was focusing on. Analyzing involved applying new knowledge to a specific sentence or example, or analyzing a sentence in terms of agent, patient, subject, and object. Self-assessing occurred when the participant said, "Oh, I don't really understand this part, this isn't clear to me," something of that sort. And rereading had to do with just rereading part or all of a card. Now I'm going to describe the tests. I'll get to this slide in a minute. When we scored the tests, the basic unit of analysis was student talk in response to each test item. So for each test answer, we assigned a score that reflected the accuracy of the answer. That is, did the participant identify the voice of the sentence? So if it was "je prépare," did the participant know that that was an active sentence, active voice sentence? And also we assessed the quality of the explanation she used to justify her answer. So we used 4 codes that you have on the screen to score the test answers. CN indicated it was a code assigned to test answers where the participant correctly identified the voice of the sentence in question but offered no explanation. Next, correct answer with a correct explanation was assigned when the participant correctly identified the voice of a given sentence and justified her answers by drawing on relevant information presented in the explanatory text. And to distinguish between participants who gave minimal justification and those who provided an elaborate analysis of the sentences, we counted the number of languaging units used in each explanation. So CC answers were given 2 points for the correct identification of the voice of the sentence, and an extra point for each piece of information used when the participant explained her response. And then the third code was CW, so participants correctly identified the voice of the sentence but provided explanations that showed that they had not understood, and we gave those responses 1 point, and then there were wrong answers that got no points. Okay, now what did we find out? As you see in the figure before you, the high languagers, Heidi and Holly, produced an average of 125.5 languaging units. This is in response to the cards, the explanatory cards, while the low languagers, Lisa and Lucy, produced fewer, with an average of 39.5 languaging units. And now you have a different figure that shows you the different types. So for all types of units, we had paraphrase, inference, analysis, self-assessment, and rereading. For all those types of units, the high languagers produced a considerably higher number. If we take analysis, the middle category as an example, Heidi and Holly produced 31 units on average, and Lisa and Lucy produced 11.5 on average. Now we're going to the oral post-test. And the oral post-test was the test in which the students got the pre-test again. So they had a text with bolded verbs, and they had to say as much as they could about the voice of the sentence in which the bolded verb appeared, and also give their reasons, give explanations as much as possible. So figure 3 shows that the highest languagers obtained an average score of 12.5. Whoops, am I at figure 3? Yes, 12.5 out of 13. And that's the dark bar, while the lowest languagers got an average of 10 out of 13. But more importantly, when Heidi and Holly explained their answers, they used 31.5 languaging units on average, while Lisa and Lucy only used 16.5 languaging units on average. Okay, now we go to the delayed post-test. The delayed post-test was the one in which we gave them the second part of the Sophie Mercier text. We had left 11 verbs blank. We provided the infinitive so that they wouldn't have lexical difficulties. And here you have an overview of the results. As in the case of the slides I just showed you, The results for the delayed post-test suggest that there's a connection between the number of languaging units used during the languaging stage and performance. On this delayed post-test, Heidi and Holly wrote the correct form, that's the darkest bar, on 8.5 of 11 test items, while Lisa and Lucy, the dark bar, filled in 5.5 forms correctly. But notice that when the 4 participants were asked to identify the voice of each sentence that they had filled in a blank for, Heidi and Holly averaged 8 correct answers, and Lisa and Lucy averaged 3. Okay? Apart from the differences in the number of correct responses, the depth and quality of the explanations differed considerably. Because you can see, looking at the right-hand part of the graph, that the lighter bar shows that Lisa and Lucy produced only 1 explanation per answer, that's the last bar on your graph, while Heidi and Holly produced 14.5 languaging units in the stimulated recall. So when they were asked to, why did they write the form that they wrote? Why did they choose that voice? They were able to explain better, giving many more explanations than the low languagers. So now I'm moving into discussion. A review of the findings from our small but complicated data set gives us preliminary questions to our preliminary answers to our research questions. We didn't include all the participants in the analyses I've been able to present in this relatively short time, but to us it is clear that high languagers learn about the grammatical concept of voice with some depth of understanding. There's a clear relationship between the quality and quantity of languaging and performance as measured by the immediate and delayed post-tests. In the delayed post-tests, the participants' pattern of languaging remained stable because Lisa and Lucy continued to be low languagers, as evidenced in their stimulated recall, and Heidi and Holly, who produced almost 4 times as many languaging units in the stimulated recall, continued to be high languagers. But what clearly demonstrates the power of languaging is the participants' performances on both immediate and delayed post-tests. Not only did the high languagers perform more consistently than the low languagers, but their depth of understanding of the concept of voice was much greater, given that they produced more languaging units in their explanations of their responses. On delayed post-test A, that's the one where they filled in the blanks, the written responses tap into the ability to produce the correct voice, but the languaging taps into the depth of understanding. If we think about testing now, performance on a written test alone may not be sufficient evidence to demonstrate knowledge of voice. We argue that the ability to language about why a particular voice was used demonstrates a deeper conceptual understanding. And an implication for testing, therefore, is that these findings highlight the need to obtain multiple measures when assessing grammatical knowledge, and that accurate production is not necessarily concomitant with level of understanding. Given that our participants had no opportunities for communicative practice, we think that our findings are remarkable. We suggest that learners should be provided with complete, coherent conceptual knowledge, that is, scientific knowledge about the second language, that they be provided with appropriate means such as diagrams to help them internalize grammatical concepts, and mostly the opportunities to engage in languaging so that conceptual understanding of grammar can guide their subsequent linguistic performance. Languaging is a key component of the internalization process, and it can productively be introduced into classroom practice. And we elaborate on this in some publications that are going to appear. We hope that the data we presented here have convinced you that muttering and talking out loud are important steps in learning a second language. Thanks.